CEO and co-founder of MuniRent, an equipment sharing website for government. Mr. Mon holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Michigan State University and a Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Michigan. For the presentation, we're going to explore the concept of equipment sharing. Infrastructure and equipment costs are expensive, as every city knows. Whether you're an elected official, a manager, clerk, or public works director or team member, we are confident this session will be educational for you. When it comes to large equipment, should you own, rent, or share? What are the right options for your city? And if you did want to share, what is the best process? Alan is going to address both the role of the renter and the owner. The League of Cities was asked to help develop this webinar after a meeting through the National League of Cities in Washington, D.C. with the MuniRent company. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
Thank you very much, Jan. I hope everyone can see my screen. Yeah, like Jan mentioned, my name is Alan Mond. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MuniRent, and MuniRent is an equipment sharing website for government agencies. I also want to introduce Julian Vanier, who's MuniRent's CTO and co-founder, and he'll be available to answer any questions via the chat interface. Of course, we will do a Q&A at the very end. But in case you have any questions throughout the presentation, just type them on the chat, and Julian will be online answering them. So how did we get involved as a tech startup helping government agencies share heavy-duty equipment? Well, as it turns out, when we were researching this space, government-owned heavy equipment, we found out just amazing numbers. So government-owned heavy equipment, for the most part, sits idle 70% of the time. Now that means that only 30% of the time it's used for a project. The rest of it is just sitting. So to put that with hard numbers, in California alone, cities have spent over $24 billion in heavy equipment since 2008. At 70% underutilization, so in other words, 70% of idle time, that means that $16.8 billion is locked in capital that could be allocated for other things. And to put that into perspective, into something that we can really wrap our heads around, that's about 16,800 new ladder trucks. Each ladder truck is about $1 million. So imagine 16,800 new ladder trucks. That budget could be used for any kind of thing that surfaces at city council. So obviously this is a very big problem, and it's something that we've noticed is pretty common across the U.S. So how can we, or what can we do to help solve this problem? And more importantly, we try to address a very important question when it comes to heavy-duty equipment. Does it always make sense to purchase new equipment? And this question is something that we pose to public works directors, to city managers, to city councilmen and women. And sometimes it does make sense. So there's a caveat to this. Sometimes if the piece of equipment is mission critical, or if it's absolutely necessary to have one on backup and the city can afford it, then absolutely. That piece of equipment should be purchased and owned. However, there's a fine line between what is considered mission critical. Are there some pieces of equipment that could be mission critical but shared between different municipalities? So to make this argument and to answer this question, we're actually going to take an example of Caterpillar skid steer. A skid steer is a pretty robust piece of equipment, and it can last up to 10,000 hours before a major, very expensive part breaks. And so, according to CAT, the useful life of a skid steer is about 10,000 hours, and after that it's fully depreciated in terms of usage. So if we were to take the example of a lot of cities that we've spoken to, at 20% utilization, that's about 400 hours per year. So if we look at this and we compare how long, and we calculate how long it would take for a city to maximize the utilization of this piece of equipment at 400 hours per year, it would take 25 years to reach its useful life. So let me recap this. A Cat skid steer, its useful life is 10,000 hours. At the average utilization, it's only used 400 hours per year. That means that it'll take 25 years to fully utilize, to really squeeze the juice out of this skid steer. Now, if we were to increase the number of hours per year to, say, 1,000 or even 2,000 hours per year, which is the max utilization when this piece of equipment is used every day, when we reach that number of 2,000 hours per year, the useful life, this number, reduces to only 5 years. So that means the more you use equipment, the faster you can replace it with newer technology. So if you buy equipment every 5 years, but you fully utilize it, you're now, when you're selling it at a higher value, so it doesn't depreciate fully, but also you're purchasing new, more fuel-efficient technology. So all in all, it's a very good idea to use equipment as much as possible, and equipment manufacturers encourage this. They would rather see their equipment utilized because then they can actually sell more parts. So with this in mind, what we're noticing is that a lot of governments are taking the notion of sharing equipment to the next level. And we're seeing this growing trend across the U.S. And there are certain pockets of the country where this is more noticeable. But by now, we've all heard of companies like Airbnb and Lyft and Uber, and they comprise this sector of companies that is called the sharing economy sector. And this is something that is happening in the private sector, but it hasn't yet reached the government. And we're seeing that there is a growing trend for that to happen, and we're really excited to be right in the middle of this overlap between government equipment sharing and this notion of on-demand supply of equipment. This is called collaborative government, and this is something that we see a great future in. As we were exploring this idea of bringing the sharing economy to government, I met a sharing pioneer in Oregon. His name is Don Newell, and he's the operations manager for Marion County. So Don is a great believer in equipment sharing. He's been sharing equipment for the past 20 years with surrounding counties and surrounding cities. And he's had already 3 different intergovernmental agreements that he's put in place. Don's biggest problem with equipment sharing is not so much the agreement itself, because he already developed trust with people within his community, but it's actually how to keep track of equipment. In the past, Don, one of his agreements, Don requested every single municipality that was participating to provide an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF of all the equipment they were willing to share with other municipalities. As you can imagine, these documents can become dated very quickly. And that was such a big headache for Don and the rest of the equipment sharing community in Oregon that they decided to just do away with it. So the next version of the intergovernmental agreement, they completely deleted that requirement. So now they have an ongoing equipment sharing agreement that works because everyone knows each other. But whenever a new person comes in, they have to start calling people around to find out where the equipment is, because there is no list of equipment anymore. So this is where we recognize that technology could play a very important role in helping streamline these agreements. So we continue talking with Don and getting notes from him and all the lessons that he learned, and we try to emulate the same concept with a pilot program in Michigan. So instead of using Excel spreadsheets and PDFs, we actually built a very easy-to-use website, and we took all the lessons that Don learned from writing the intergovernmental agreements, and we wrote our own intergovernmental agreement that any municipality that wanted to participate in this pilot program, they could just sign up for free as long as they signed the agreement. And this agreement covered things like insurance liability, property damage, who's responsible for what. It basically established the rules of the game. The pilot program was very well received. We had 23 municipalities signed up. We had a county, we had school districts, public universities, so any government agency that wanted to participate, we basically said, you're welcome to join. But what was most interesting about this program was the lessons that we learned. And these are the lessons that I wanted to share with you so that you can take note of what we learned and maybe apply it to an intergovernmental agreement in Florida. So the first lesson that we learned is, whenever possible, include an operator when sharing specialized pieces of equipment. When I mean specialized pieces of equipment, I mean, for example, a street sweeper or a Vector truck. These are very expensive items, and it's usually a good idea to, when renting them out to a neighboring municipality, have them go with an operator. The second important lesson that we learned was, if you try to get a lot of city attorneys in one room to decide whether an agreement is agreeable or not, that's going to take forever. So it's very important to develop ahead of time one intergovernmental agreement and have a few municipalities approve or vet this agreement. And once you have a critical mass of 3 or 4 municipalities, getting the fifth one, it's a lot easier because this agreement cannot change now. It's been already quote set in stone by the inertia of the other city attorneys that said, okay, I don't want to change it now that 3 or 4 municipalities have agreed. And out of what I just said, the most important thing is to keep it short. So if you want to keep it, the reason why you want to keep it short is you want to avoid any language that might snag and cause a city attorney to raise their brow. So you want to keep it short, and you want to develop one intergovernmental agreement for everyone within a geographic region. And as a matter of fact, we created one intergovernmental agreement that can be used nationwide, and it's being used in California, it's being approved in Oregon, Michigan. So that's the general concept. And finally, include government agencies of all sizes. Although you might think that as a a renter of equipment or as an owner, it's better to have a large municipality next to a small municipality. It doesn't necessarily mean that that will always work. Sometimes a group of 5 or 10 municipalities that are smaller in nature might have complementary pieces of equipment, and that actually could work very well. So it's not really necessary to have a large municipality with and a small municipality. It's actually better to just have a lot of municipalities in one geographic region. Of course, larger municipalities have a lot of equipment, but they're also slower to adopt these new programs. So it might be better to get 3 or 4 smaller municipalities and start that way. So since we've started this pilot project, things have been going quite well, but something unexpected happened. That's right. We were running our pilot program, trying to get people to share equipment, and something really unexpected happened. And what happened is that we got a call from Oregon, again, that state out in the west side of the country, and they asked, there was an agency that had seen what we were doing, and they had a question. They said, could we use MuniRent internally within our own agency? And so we were a little bit perplexed, and we said, what do you mean within your own agency? They said, yeah, well, we have a lot of equipment, and we have a lot of crews, and we just have a need to be able to find equipment. So could we use it just for our own internal purposes? And we did what we typically do when we're presented with a new problem. Is we went out there and we said, okay, well, show us how you currently share equipment. So we went out there and they showed us their process. And what they did was every yard across this agency in Oregon, every yard had a whiteboard. And they kept track of the equipment. What you're seeing there are the asset IDs on a whiteboard. And they would call each other. A crew supervisor from one district would call another crew supervisor, and they would ask them if they couldn't find them. That would take about 3 or 4 days. So they would waste a lot of time. And when they got tired, they just said, you know what, I'm just going to rent it. And they rented a piece of equipment that actually the same agency owned. So we said, okay, we think we understand the problem. Let's try to implement what we've built with MuniRent, but for internal purposes. And this was the result. We created essentially a solution for the exact problem that they were having. And what was completely even more unexpected were the results of this implementation, so to speak. When we started 6 months ago doing this, and with this internal equipment sharing, and we just didn't know what to expect. And what happened was that, by the way, the agency, the Oregon Department of Transportation, this just exploded internally, right? They have about 6,000 pieces of equipment, 300 crews, and in only 6 months they were really excited because they were now able to find equipment. Crews were telling other crews that, hey, if you haven't gotten on MuniRent, you should, because now you can borrow the equipment through the system. I don't want to. They didn't even want to talk to each other on the phone before, when they were talking about reserving equipment, because they just wanted everything to be in the system. And so nowadays we see at least 1 or 2 transactions each day within that agency, and we've had over 1,700 days of reservations. So basically, equipment being loaned out, and over $250,000 in savings, because now crews are not needing to rent equipment. So they can essentially find equipment without having to go out externally and renting it from a commercial establishment. So just to recap, we basically covered some of the lessons learned from sharing equipment externally, which is having one jurisdiction or one municipality providing a piece of equipment to another municipality and getting reimbursed for it. And some of the lessons learned about sharing equipment internally and what are the advantages to doing that. And just to close this and wrap this up, it's very important to make sure that you have a successful internal equipment sharing program first before you go out and share equipment with other municipalities. If you are small enough that all your equipment is in one yard, then you're in perfect shape to actually go out and talk to other city managers, public works directors, other city staff from neighboring communities to try to start an equipment sharing program. But if you have more than one yard in different locations, it would be good to find different ways to try to share equipment internally. So speaking about sharing, we'd like you to join the collaborative government movement and do whatever you can to share this idea of having equipment being shared between municipalities and internally. So I wanted to invite you to share this story. If you're a Twitter user, tweet about this story, and the more people know about this, the more government agencies are going to jump on board across the entire country. So with that, Jan, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alan. While everybody's thinking about your questions, I just wanted to let you know that we will be putting this recorded version in our website under the historical section so that you can view it at your leisure. But right now, does anybody have any questions for Alan before we let him move on with his day? Alan, I see your email is up there on the screen, so they can have that as a reference. And then your website is the www.munirent.co.
Correct.
In case anybody's interested in contacting you further. We do have one question. Is there any Muni Rent in Florida?
Not yet, although we're having some discussions with larger cities to use it internally in Florida. We'd be happy to help set something up there. Which area of Florida? If the person who asked the question, they can type, that would be good to know. But yeah, reach out to me and we can get something going in Florida. And this was part of the reason why we had this webinar, is to kind of kick things off there as well. By the way, if anyone wants to ask questions, the way to do it is to use the chat interface.
He has indicated North Bay Village, which is down around the Miami metro area.
Okay. Yeah, we will be, so we were talking about this before, Jan. We'll be traveling to Orlando for the National Fleet Managers Association conference tomorrow, actually, so we'll be there this week in Orlando. And next week we'll be in Miami as well. So if there's any interest in any of those regions, we'd be happy to actually meet in person, because we'll be there.
Do we have any more questions out there? Ellen, would you like to just read out your email address and perhaps maybe a phone number? They're asking for the contact information for Miami.
Yeah, so my cell phone is 248-953-3496, and my email is Alan, A-L-A-N, at munirent.co, and it's actually on the screen there. And if you go to the website munirent.co, www.munirent.co, you'll find the same number on there as well.
I have someone who's indicated not to leave yet. I think they're formulating their question for you.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Ellen, how many cities do you have participating in this program?
Right now, we're actually we have, well, the 23 in Michigan. We have the Oregon Department of Transportation, and we have about 10 large cities that are looking to use this internally, and then we have a lot of the municipalities that are in the Oregon agreement that they're looking at actually using this as a tool as well. So it's more of a they're not going to use the intergovernmental agreement, or otherwise known as IGA, but they'll use the website itself as a tool to find equipment.
The question came in. It's do you have a template of the agreement between agencies?
Yeah, so we can certainly forward that. If you send me an email, I can definitely forward that intergovernmental agreement.
What pointers do you have to encourage a big city to go into an interlocal with a very small town?
That's a very good question. Well, a lot of the same things apply. If they have equipment that's just sitting around, and they could generate some revenue by renting out that equipment to a smaller municipality, you know, dollars are always a good motivator because they would essentially offset the maintenance cost of that piece of equipment by renting it. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just to have a lot of smaller municipalities join together, and all of them reaching out to the larger municipality as a unified voice. That also is a good idea. Overall, it's really a matter of relationships. So if you have a good working relationship with someone within that city, that makes things significantly easier. And I don't know if I explained this before, but one of the key elements that we found was, and it sounds commonsensical, but developing trust early on in whatever, at whatever stage you are is critical. So making sure that you're open about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and establishing that trust early on makes it a lot easier in the future when you're starting to borrow expensive pieces of equipment.
Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. So on behalf of the League of Cities, thank you so much for your presentation today, Alan. And remember that the recorded version will be posted in the website so you can take a look at it at any time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and if anyone has any other questions, they can reach out to me at alan@munirent.co or go to munirent.co and send me an information request through the website.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for participating today.
Thank you very much.